Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that Colgate-Palmolive is experiencing significant supply chain disruptions in key manufacturing regions due to unforeseen geopolitical events. These disruptions are likely to impact production volumes and increase raw material costs in the upcoming fiscal quarter. What is the most appropriate course of action for Colgate-Palmolive's finance and legal departments to ensure compliance with U.S. securities regulations and ethical reporting standards? Option A. Immediately halt all external investor communications until the supply chain situation is fully resolved and the precise financial impact is known, to avoid providing incomplete or potentially inaccurate information. Option B. Downplay the severity of the supply chain issues in internal discussions and external communications, assuming that the situation is temporary and will resolve itself before impacting reported financials. Option C. Proactively assess the potential financial impact of the disruptions, consult with legal counsel to determine disclosure requirements, and prepare to include relevant information in upcoming financial reports and investor communications. Option D. Focus on highlighting positive operational achievements from other regions to offset the negative impact of the disruptions in investor communications, and wait to disclose the full extent of the disruptions until the financial impact is definitively quantified. The correct answer is C. Proactively assess the potential financial impact of the disruptions, consult with legal counsel to determine disclosure requirements, and prepare to include relevant information in upcoming financial reports and investor communications. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Colgate-Palmolive to balance the need for efficient global operations with strict adherence to the regulatory framework governing financial reporting and disclosure. The pressure to present a favorable financial picture can create an ethical dilemma, demanding careful judgment to ensure compliance and transparency. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and disclosing potential risks and uncertainties that could impact Colgate-Palmolive's financial performance. This aligns with the principles of fair presentation and transparency mandated by accounting standards and securities regulations. Specifically, it upholds the requirement for companies to provide investors with sufficient information to make informed decisions, preventing misleading impressions about the company's financial health. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying or omitting information about potential supply chain disruptions would fail to meet the regulatory obligation to disclose material information. This omission could mislead stakeholders about the true risks facing Colgate-Palmolive, potentially violating securities laws that require full and fair disclosure of all material facts. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively highlighting positive operational metrics while ignoring negative ones, would also be a failure of transparency and could be considered misleading, violating ethical standards and potentially regulatory requirements for comprehensive reporting. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay reporting until the full impact of the disruption is definitively known, risks violating reporting timelines and failing to provide timely information to the market, which is a critical component of regulatory compliance. Professionals at Colgate-Palmolive should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves establishing clear internal controls for risk identification and disclosure, fostering a culture where employees feel empowered to report potential issues, and conducting regular reviews of financial reporting to ensure accuracy and completeness in accordance with all applicable regulations. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Colgate-Palmolive needs to analyze employee data to identify potential operational risks. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for data analysis with the protection of employee privacy? Option A. Obtain explicit, broad consent from all employees for the use of their data in any risk assessment. Option B. Access and analyze raw, identifiable employee data, relying on internal policies to prevent misuse. Option C. Discard all employee data that could potentially be used in the risk assessment to avoid any privacy concerns. Option D. Anonymize or pseudonymize employee data before conducting the risk assessment analysis. The correct answer is D. Anonymize or pseudonymize employee data before conducting the risk assessment analysis. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Colgate-Palmolive to balance the need for efficient data analysis with the imperative to protect sensitive employee information. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential privacy risks without unduly hindering legitimate business operations. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with data protection regulations, while still deriving value from employee data. The correct approach involves anonymizing or pseudonymizing employee data before it is used for risk assessment analysis. This method is correct because it directly addresses the core privacy concern by removing or obscuring personally identifiable information. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation often found in data protection frameworks, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. If this were a relevant jurisdiction, or similar principles embedded in U.S. privacy laws like the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, or HIPAA for health-related data, depending on the specific context of the assessment. By anonymizing or pseudonymizing, Colgate-Palmolive can analyze trends and identify risks without exposing individual employees' private details, thereby upholding ethical obligations and regulatory requirements for data privacy. An approach that involves direct access to raw, identifiable employee data for the risk assessment is incorrect. This fails to adequately protect employee privacy and could lead to breaches of confidentiality. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for individual privacy rights. Legally, it could violate data protection laws by processing personal data without a sufficient legal basis or adequate safeguards, potentially exposing Colgate-Palmolive to significant fines and reputational damage. An approach that relies solely on employee consent for all data usage, without implementing technical safeguards like anonymization, is also incorrect. While consent is a legal basis for data processing, it is not always sufficient on its own, especially when dealing with large datasets for analytical purposes. Over-reliance on consent can be problematic if consent is not freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous, or if the scope of consent is too broad. Furthermore, it doesn't proactively minimize risk. It places the burden on the individual and doesn't inherently reduce the exposure of sensitive data during the analysis phase. An approach that involves discarding all employee data due to perceived privacy risks is incorrect. This is an overly cautious and inefficient response that prevents Colgate-Palmolive from conducting necessary risk assessments and potentially improving its operations. While risk mitigation is crucial, it should be achieved through appropriate controls and data handling practices, not through the complete abandonment of valuable data that could be used responsibly. This approach fails to apply the principle of proportionality, where the benefits of data analysis are weighed against the privacy risks, and appropriate measures are implemented to manage those risks. Professionals should employ a risk-based approach to data handling. This involves identifying potential privacy risks associated with data processing activities, assessing the likelihood and impact of those risks, and implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate them. This includes prioritizing data minimization, employing anonymization or pseudonymization techniques where feasible, ensuring data security, and establishing clear data governance policies that align with relevant legal and ethical standards. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Colgate-Palmolive's global supply chain operations are exposed to varying environmental, social, and governance-esque regulations across its manufacturing and distribution hubs. To ensure consistent compliance and mitigate potential legal and reputational risks, which of the following approaches to regulatory adherence is most professionally sound? Option A. Focus compliance efforts solely on regulations that have direct and immediate financial penalties for non-adherence. Option B. Implement a tiered compliance system that adheres to the strictest applicable regulations in each specific jurisdiction where Colgate-Palmolive operates. Option C. Rely on the discretion of local operational managers to interpret and apply relevant regulations based on immediate business needs. Option D. Adopt the regulatory standards of the jurisdiction with the lowest compliance burden across all global operations. The correct answer is D. Adopt the regulatory standards of the jurisdiction with the lowest compliance burden across all global operations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Colgate-Palmolive to balance the need for efficient global operations with the imperative to comply with diverse and potentially conflicting regulatory requirements across different jurisdictions. Failure to accurately assess and manage these risks can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to identify the most relevant regulatory frameworks and to implement consistent, yet adaptable compliance strategies. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes adherence to the most stringent applicable regulations. This ensures that Colgate-Palmolive not only meets the minimum legal standards, but also establishes a robust compliance framework that can withstand scrutiny across various markets. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation of corporate responsibility and the legal requirement to operate within the bounds of all applicable laws and regulations. It demonstrates a commitment to integrity and good corporate citizenship, which are crucial for maintaining stakeholder trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the lowest common denominator of regulatory requirements across all markets would be professionally unacceptable. This is because it risks violating stricter regulations in specific jurisdictions, leading to legal repercussions and potential market exclusion. Another incorrect approach, which relies on ad hoc compliance based on immediate operational needs without a systematic risk assessment, fails to establish a predictable and defensible compliance posture. This can result in inconsistent application of policies and an increased likelihood of unintentional noncompliance. Relying on internal legal counsel alone without engaging external expertise when necessary can also be a failure, as it may overlook nuanced or emerging regulatory interpretations specific to certain regions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape in all operating jurisdictions. This involves identifying all relevant laws, regulations, and industry guidelines. Subsequently, a risk assessment should be conducted to evaluate the potential impact and likelihood of noncompliance in each area. The chosen compliance strategy should then be the one that addresses the highest level of risk and meets the most stringent regulatory requirements, with mechanisms for adaptation to local nuances where necessary. Regular review and updates to the compliance framework are essential to account for changes in regulations and business operations. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that Colgate-Palmolive is preparing its annual sustainability report. A marketing team proposes framing the report to emphasize only the company's successes in reducing plastic waste, while downplaying or omitting data related to increased water consumption in certain manufacturing processes. Which approach best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical reporting standards for a publicly traded company like Colgate-Palmolive? Option A. Include vague statements about environmental efforts without providing specific data or metrics to avoid potential criticism. Option B. Exaggerate the positive environmental impacts and use misleading language to create a more favorable impression of Colgate-Palmolive's sustainability performance. Option C. Present a balanced report that includes both achievements in plastic waste reduction and transparent data on water consumption, along with explanations for any increases and planned mitigation strategies. Option D. Focus the report exclusively on the positive achievements in plastic waste reduction to enhance the company's public image as an environmental leader. Correct answer is C. Present a balanced report that includes both achievements in plastic waste reduction and transparent data on water consumption, along with explanations for any increases and planned mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the imperative to adhere to strict regulatory disclosure requirements. Colgate-Palmolive, as a publicly traded entity, is subject to regulations that mandate transparency regarding its environmental impact and sustainability initiatives. Misrepresenting or selectively disclosing information, even with the intention of appearing more environmentally responsible, can lead to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of investor trust. The challenge lies in balancing marketing objectives with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a commitment to accurate and comprehensive reporting of environmental data, aligning with the principles of regulatory compliance and corporate social responsibility. This means not only disclosing positive achievements, but also acknowledging areas where improvement is needed, supported by verifiable data and transparent methodologies. This approach upholds the integrity of Colgate-Palmolive's public statements and ensures adherence to relevant environmental regulations and reporting standards, fostering long-term credibility. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on highlighting positive environmental achievements without acknowledging or addressing negative impacts or areas for improvement would be a failure of regulatory compliance and ethical communication. This selective disclosure can be construed as misleading or deceptive, violating principles of transparency and potentially contravening specific disclosure requirements. Another incorrect approach that involves fabricating or exaggerating environmental performance data would constitute outright fraud and a severe breach of regulatory mandates, leading to significant legal repercussions and irreparable damage to the company's reputation. A third incorrect approach that relies on vague, unsubstantiated claims without providing concrete evidence or data would fail to meet the standards of verifiable reporting expected by regulators and stakeholders, undermining the credibility of Colgate Palmolive's sustainability efforts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific disclosure requirements applicable to Colgate-Palmolive, consulting with legal and compliance departments, and ensuring that all public communications are factually accurate, well supported by data, and transparent about both progress and challenges. A proactive approach to compliance, rather than a reactive one, is crucial for navigating these complex situations effectively. Question 5. Operational review demonstrates that a recent Colgate-Palmolive hiring assessment test, designed to evaluate candidates for a key marketing role, may have inadvertently included questions that could be interpreted as biased against certain demographic groups, potentially violating equal employment opportunity principles. The internal audit team has flagged this as a significant concern requiring immediate attention. Option A. Focus solely on the business impact of the potential bias, such as the risk of losing qualified candidates, and implement changes to the assessment test only if it demonstrably affects the company's ability to meet its hiring targets. Option B. Immediately halt the use of the assessment test, conduct a thorough review of all questions for potential bias, and proactively report the findings and proposed corrective actions to the relevant U.S. regulatory bodies, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC. Option C. Instruct the audit team to rephrase the findings to minimize the perceived severity of the potential bias, allowing the assessment test to continue in use until a more opportune time for review, such as after the current hiring cycle concludes. Option D. Continue using the assessment test while initiating an internal review, with the intention of making minor adjustments to the questions only if the review confirms a significant bias, and only reporting the issue if explicitly requested by a regulatory body. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the use of the assessment test, conduct a thorough review of all questions for potential bias, and proactively report the findings and proposed corrective actions to the relevant U.S. regulatory bodies, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet performance targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential issues, but doing so carries significant risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not only expedient, but also ethically sound and legally compliant. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency and proactive engagement with regulatory bodies. This means immediately reporting the identified issue, even if it might lead to short-term financial penalties or reputational damage. This approach aligns with the principles of corporate responsibility and good governance, which prioritize ethical conduct and adherence to legal frameworks over short-term gains. Specifically, in the context of a U.S.-based hiring assessment test, this would likely involve adhering to principles outlined in regulations such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX) regarding internal controls and financial reporting, and potentially Equal Employment Opportunity Commission (EOC) guidelines if the issue relates to discriminatory practices in hiring. The ethical imperative is to act with integrity and to rectify any potential harm caused by the company's practices. An incorrect approach would be to delay or conceal the information. This could involve attempting to fix the issue internally without disclosure, hoping it goes unnoticed. Such an approach is ethically flawed because it prioritizes self-preservation over accountability and transparency. It also carries significant legal risks, as concealment can be viewed as obstruction or fraud, leading to more severe penalties than if the issue were reported promptly. Furthermore, It erodes trust with stakeholders, including employees, customers, and regulators. Another incorrect approach might be to downplay the severity of the issue, arguing that it is a minor oversight with no real impact. This is problematic because it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to appreciate the potential downstream consequences of even seemingly small irregularities. It also signals a disregard for the spirit of regulatory compliance, even if the letter of the law is technically met. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves a thorough understanding of applicable laws and regulations, a commitment to open communication, and a willingness to escalate concerns through appropriate channels. When faced with a potential issue, professionals should gather all relevant facts, assess the potential risks and consequences, and consult with legal and compliance departments. The ultimate goal should be to act in a manner that upholds the company's integrity and fosters a culture of accountability. Question 6. System analysis indicates that Colgate-Palmolive is preparing to implement a new online hiring assessment for entry-level sales positions. The assessment vendor claims their tool is universally compliant with hiring regulations. A Colgate-Palmolive HR manager is responsible for ensuring the assessment adheres to the specific jurisdictional requirements of the hiring process, which are governed by U.S. federal and state employment laws. Which approach best ensures compliance and ethical hiring practices? Option A. Modifying the assessment questions based on informal feedback from recent hires to make it more relatable. Option B. Proactively engaging with Colgate-Palmolive's legal and HR departments to review the assessment's design, validation studies, and potential disparate impact on protected groups, ensuring alignment with U.S. federal and state employment laws. Option C. Prioritizing the speed of deployment and cost-effectiveness of the assessment over detailed regulatory review. Option D. Relying on the vendor's general compliance statement and proceeding with the assessment as is. The correct answer is D. Relying on the vendor's general compliance statement and proceeding with the assessment as is. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Colgate-Palmolive employee tasked with ensuring compliance with hiring assessment test regulations. The challenge lies in navigating the specific jurisdictional requirements of the assessment, which, for the purpose of this exam, are assumed to be governed by U.S. federal and state employment laws and relevant ethical guidelines for hiring practices. A careful judgment is required to select the approach that aligns with these regulations, particularly concerning fair employment and non-discriminatory practices. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the Colgate-Palmolive hiring assessment test specific jurisdictional requirements, focusing on U.S. federal laws such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA), and the Age Discrimination in Employment Act (ADEA), as well as any applicable state-specific employment laws. This approach prioritizes ensuring the assessment is job-related, validated, and does not disproportionately impact protected groups. It requires proactive engagement with legal and HR departments to confirm compliance and address any potential concerns before the assessment is administered. This aligns with ethical hiring principles and regulatory mandates to prevent discrimination and promote equal employment opportunities. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the assessment provides generic assurances without independent verification would be professionally unacceptable. It fails to meet the due diligence required by U.S. employment law, which places the responsibility on the employer, Colgate-Palmolive, to ensure the assessment's validity and fairness. Another incorrect approach, which involves adapting the assessment based on anecdotal feedback without a structured validation process, risks introducing bias and violating anti-discrimination laws. This bypasses the rigorous, evidence-based methods necessary for legal compliance. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed and cost efficiency over regulatory adherence would be a significant ethical and legal misstep, potentially leading to costly litigation and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This includes identifying all applicable regulations, consulting with internal legal and HR experts, verifying the validity and job-relatedness of any assessment tools, and establishing clear protocols for assessment administration and review. When in doubt, seeking external expert advice is crucial. The ultimate goal is to implement hiring practices that are both effective and legally sound, upholding Colgate-Palmolive's commitment to fair employment. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that Colgate-Palmolive is planning to launch a new toothpaste product in both the United States and the European Union, which contains a novel, naturally derived ingredient that has been identified as a potential allergen for a small subset of the population. Considering the differing regulatory frameworks for product labeling and consumer information in these two jurisdictions, what is the most appropriate implementation strategy for Colgate-Palmolive to ensure compliance and protect consumer interests? Option A. Implement a standardized allergen warning statement across all packaging for both markets, based on general best practices for consumer product safety. Option B. Prioritize the speed of market entry by launching the product with a generic, may contain allergens disclaimer and address specific regulatory concerns in each market post-launch. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the specific allergen labeling requirements in both the United States, e.g., FALCPA, and the European Union, e.g., FIC regulation, and tailor the product's ingredient disclosure and allergen warnings accordingly for each market. Option D. Rely on the marketing department's assessment of consumer understanding of potential allergens to determine the appropriate level of disclosure for the new ingredient. Correct answer is A. Implement a standardized allergen warning statement across all packaging for both markets, based on general best practices for consumer product safety. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Colgate-Palmolive, as a global consumer goods company, operates under diverse regulatory landscapes. Navigating these differing requirements for product labeling and ingredient disclosure, particularly concerning potential allergens, demands meticulous attention to detail and a robust compliance framework. The challenge lies in ensuring that marketing claims and product information are not only accurate, but also legally compliant in every market where the product is sold, avoiding misleading consumers and potential legal repercussions. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive review of all relevant regulations in each target market before product launch. This means engaging local legal and regulatory experts to interpret specific requirements for allergen labeling, such as the EU's Food Information to Consumers (FIC) regulation, or the U.S.'s Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act (FALCPA), and ensuring Colgate-Palmolive's internal processes can accommodate these nuances. This approach is correct because it prioritizes consumer safety and regulatory adherence, minimizing the risk of non-compliance, product recalls, or reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices by providing clear and accurate information to consumers, empowering them to make informed purchasing decisions. An incorrect approach would be to assume that labeling standards are uniform across all markets and to apply a single, generalized allergen warning. This fails to acknowledge the specific legal mandates in different jurisdictions, such as the EU's requirement for explicit allergen listing and ingredients and the US's focus on the Big 9 allergens. Such an approach risks violating local laws, potentially leading to fines, import restrictions, and consumer distrust. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market over thorough regulatory due diligence. This might involve launching a product with minimal labeling review, hoping to address any issues post-launch. This is ethically unsound and legally risky, as it places consumers at potential risk without adequate warning and exposes Colgate-Palmolive to significant penalties for non-compliance. It demonstrates a disregard for consumer well-being and regulatory obligations. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on marketing's interpretation of regulatory requirements without consulting legal or regulatory affairs departments. Marketing teams may focus on consumer appeal and brand messaging, potentially overlooking critical legal nuances of allergen disclosure. This can lead to inaccurate or insufficient labeling, creating a significant compliance gap. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a multidisciplinary team approach. Before any product launch or significant marketing campaign, a thorough regulatory impact assessment should be conducted. This involves identifying all relevant jurisdictions, researching applicable laws and guidelines, e.g., specific food safety regulations, advertising standards, and consulting with internal legal and external regulatory experts. A risk-based approach should be adopted, prioritizing areas with the highest potential for consumer harm or legal penalty. Clear communication channels and documented approval processes are essential to ensure that all stakeholders are aligned, and that compliance is embedded throughout the product lifecycle. Question 8. Upon reviewing a proposed digital marketing campaign for Colgate Palmolive's new toothpaste line, the marketing team has identified an opportunity to leverage customer purchase history data to send highly personalized promotional emails. However, the data was collected under general terms of service that did not explicitly detail its use for targeted email marketing of new product lines. What is the most appropriate course of action for Colgate Palmolive to ensure regulatory compliance and ethical marketing practices? Option A. Obtain explicit consent from customers for the use of their purchase history data for targeted email marketing before sending any communications. Option B. Proceed with sending personalized emails, assuming customers implicitly consent to marketing communications related to their past purchases. Option C. Rely on Colgate-Palmolive's existing internal marketing guidelines, which permit the use of customer data for promotional purposes without requiring specific consent for each campaign. Option D. Anonymize the purchase history data and use it for broad, non-personalized email marketing to all customers. The correct answer is B. Proceed with sending personalized emails, assuming customers implicitly consent to marketing communications related to their past purchases. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a business objective and the strict adherence to regulatory compliance, specifically concerning data privacy and marketing practices. Colgate-Palmolive, as a global entity, must navigate a complex web of regulations to ensure its marketing campaigns are both effective and lawful. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the desire to leverage customer data for targeted marketing with the imperative to protect individual privacy rights as mandated by relevant laws. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of customer trust. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and application of data privacy regulations, such as those governing consent, data usage, and marketing communications. This approach prioritizes obtaining explicit consent from customers before using their personal information for marketing purposes, ensuring transparency about how data will be used, and providing clear opt-out mechanisms. This aligns with the principles of lawful and fair data processing, respecting individual autonomy and privacy rights. Regulatory justification stems from the requirement to comply with data protection laws that mandate consent-based marketing and prohibit unsolicited communications or the misuse of personal data. Ethically, this approach upholds the principle of respect for individuals and their right to control their personal information. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with marketing based on assumptions of consent or implied consent fails to meet the stringent requirements of data privacy laws. This can lead to regulatory violations, fines, and legal action. Ethically, it breaches the trust placed in the company by its customers and demonstrates a disregard for their privacy. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with marketing without adequately anonymizing or de-identifying data, poses a direct risk of exposing personal information, violating privacy regulations, and potentially leading to data breaches. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to implement appropriate data security measures. A third incorrect approach, which is to rely solely on internal company policies without cross-referencing current external regulatory requirements, is dangerous as internal policies may not be up-to-date or fully compliant with evolving legal landscapes. This can result in unintentional noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive approach to regulatory understanding. This includes establishing robust internal compliance frameworks, conducting regular training for relevant personnel on data privacy and marketing regulations, and seeking legal counsel when in doubt. Before launching any marketing campaign that utilizes customer data, a comprehensive review of the proposed activities against applicable regulations should be performed. This review should include assessing consent mechanisms, data handling procedures, and communication protocols to ensure full compliance and ethical conduct. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal a potential inconsistency in the manufacturing process for a Colgate-Palmolive toothpaste product, which could lead to a minor aesthetic variation in the product's appearance. While no immediate health risks have been identified, the variation is outside the company's standard specifications. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Colgate-Palmolive quality assurance team? Option A. Instruct the production line to resume normal operations while monitoring consumer complaints, assuming the aesthetic variation is unlikely to cause significant issues. Option B. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis of the manufacturing inconsistency, document all findings, and consult with regulatory affairs to determine if external reporting or further action is required based on the specific nature and potential impact of the variation. Option C. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging a potential product defect and advising consumers to cease using the product until further notice. Option D. Initiate an immediate, broad voluntary recall of all affected product batches to err on the side of caution and prevent any potential consumer dissatisfaction. Correct answer is D. Initiate an immediate, broad voluntary recall of all affected product batches to err on the side of caution and prevent any potential consumer dissatisfaction. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address a potential product defect with the company's obligation to adhere to regulatory reporting requirements and maintain consumer trust. Colgate Palmolive, as a global consumer goods company, operates under stringent regulations designed to protect public health and ensure product safety. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action when a quality control issue arises, considering the potential impact on consumers, the brand's reputation, and legal liabilities. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complexities of product recalls, investigations, and stakeholder communication. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation into the root cause of the potential defect, followed by prompt and transparent communication with relevant regulatory bodies, such as the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in the United States, if applicable to the product category. This approach aligns with the principles of product stewardship and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it adheres to the FDA's regulations concerning adverse event reporting and recalls, which mandate that manufacturers take appropriate action to protect consumers when a product poses a health risk. Ethical considerations also dictate that the company prioritize consumer safety above all else, which necessitates swift action based on credible evidence of a defect. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying the issue or delaying a formal investigation risks violating regulatory mandates. For instance, failing to report a potential defect to the FDA within the prescribed timeframe can result in significant penalties, including fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, such as initiating a voluntary recall without a comprehensive understanding of the defect's scope and severity, could lead to unnecessary disruption, cost, and erosion of consumer confidence if the issue is later found to be minor or non-existent. Furthermore, withholding information from regulatory bodies or the public is a direct contravention of transparency principles and can lead to severe legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the potential risks and regulatory obligations. This involves forming a cross-functional team, including quality assurance, legal, regulatory affairs, and communications, to assess the situation, gather data, and determine the appropriate level of response. The framework should prioritize consumer safety, followed by regulatory compliance, and then business continuity. Documentation at every stage is crucial to demonstrate due diligence and adherence to established protocols. Question 10. The control framework reveals a potential discrepancy in expense reporting procedures at Colgate-Palmolive, with some employees allegedly submitting claims without adequate supporting documentation. The internal audit team is tasked with investigating this matter. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional audit standards and the company's need for efficient and effective oversight? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive, unfocused review of all expense reports submitted across all departments for the past 5 years to identify any anomalies. Option B. Rely on informal discussions and employee gossip to gather information and form conclusions about the validity of expense claims. Option C. Immediately escalate the suspicion to senior management for their directive on how to proceed, without conducting any preliminary investigation. Option D. Conduct a systematic review of documented expense reporting policies and procedures, and then perform a targeted sampling of recent expense submissions to verify against supporting documentation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a systematic review of documented expense reporting policies and procedures, and then perform a targeted sampling of recent expense submissions to verify against supporting documentation. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Colgate-Palmolive's internal audit team to balance the need for thorough investigation with the potential for disruption and reputational damage. The team must exercise careful judgment in determining the scope and methodology of their review to ensure it is both effective and proportionate. The correct approach involves a systematic review of documented policies and procedures related to expense reporting, and a targeted sampling of recent expense submissions for verification against supporting documentation. This is the most professionally sound approach because it aligns with standard internal audit practices and regulatory expectations for financial controls. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of due diligence and risk assessment, ensuring that Colgate-Palmolive maintains robust financial integrity and compliance with its own internal policies, which are designed to prevent fraud and ensure accurate financial reporting. This methodical approach minimizes unnecessary disruption while maximizing the likelihood of identifying any control weaknesses or policy violations. An incorrect approach that involves immediately escalating the suspicion to senior management without preliminary verification would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due process and could lead to unwarranted accusations, damaging employee morale, and potentially creating legal liabilities for Colgate-Palmolive if the suspicion proves unfounded. It bypasses the fundamental audit principle of gathering evidence before making judgments. Another incorrect approach, which is to conduct a broad, unfocused review of all expense reports from the past 5 years, would be professionally unsound due to its inefficiency and potential for overreach. Thoroughness is important. This approach lacks the targeted risk assessment necessary for effective internal auditing. It would consume excessive resources without a clear justification based on identified risks, potentially diverting attention from more critical areas, and failing to provide timely insights into current control effectiveness. This approach neglects the principle of materiality and efficient resource allocation in auditing. A further incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal evidence or rumors without any attempt to corroborate them with documented policies or transactional data, is professionally unacceptable. This method is inherently unreliable and violates the core audit principle of evidence-based findings. It risks making decisions based on speculation rather than factual data, which can lead to incorrect conclusions and inappropriate actions, undermining the credibility of the internal audit function and potentially exposing Colgate-Palmolive to significant risks. The professional reasoning process for Colgate-Palmolive's internal audit team in such situations should involve: 1. Understanding the nature of the suspicion and its potential impact. 2. Identifying relevant internal policies and external regulatory requirements, if applicable to the specific context of the suspicion, though this question focuses on internal controls. 3. Developing a risk-based audit plan that prioritizes areas of highest potential risk. 4. Executing the audit plan with appropriate documentation and evidence gathering. 5. Analyzing findings objectively and reporting them accurately to management. 6. Recommending corrective actions to strengthen controls and prevent recurrence. Question 11. Examination of the data shows that Colgate-Palmolive is experiencing a significant decline in market share in a key emerging market due to increased competition and unforeseen regulatory changes. While the company has a strong history of positive financial reporting, this trend, if publicly disclosed without careful framing, could negatively impact investor confidence and stock price. A senior executive suggests focusing communications on the company's long-term strategic initiatives and global brand strength, while only briefly mentioning the market share challenges as a temporary operational issue. What is the most appropriate approach for Colgate-Palmolive to take in its next public earnings report and investor call, considering its obligations under U.S. securities laws and ethical reporting standards? Option A. Provide a balanced disclosure that clearly articulates the reasons for the market share decline, quantifies its potential impact on future earnings, and outlines specific strategies being implemented to address the challenges, while also highlighting the company's overall resilience and long-term growth prospects. Option B. Emphasize the company's robust global brand portfolio and ongoing investments in innovation, with only a cursory mention of the market share challenges, framing them as minor operational hurdles that are being actively managed without significant financial implications. Option C. Release a press statement acknowledging a general slowdown in certain emerging markets without specifying Colgate Palmolive's situation, and then address specific questions about market share only if directly asked by analysts during the investor call. Option D. Focus solely on the positive aspects of the company's performance, such as revenue growth in other regions and cost-saving measures, and defer any discussion of the market share decline to a future internal review to avoid alarming investors. The correct answer is A. Provide a balanced disclosure that clearly articulates the reasons for the market share decline, quantifies its potential impact on future earnings, and outlines specific strategies being implemented to address the challenges, while also highlighting the company's overall resilience and long-term growth prospects. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Colgate-Palmolive employees due to the inherent conflict between the desire to present a positive public image and the obligation to accurately report financial performance. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of ethical reporting standards and the regulatory framework governing public companies. The core of the challenge lies in balancing stakeholder expectations with the legal and ethical imperative of transparency. The correct approach involves a commitment to accurate and timely disclosure, even when the information is unfavorable. This aligns with the principles of corporate governance and securities regulations, which mandate that public companies provide material information to investors and the market in a fair and unbiased manner. Specifically, adherence to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) regulations, such as those under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, requires full and fair disclosure of all material information that could influence an investor's decision. This includes negative developments. Ethical considerations also demand honesty and integrity, preventing any misrepresentation or omission of facts that could mislead stakeholders. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying or omitting negative information to manage public perception would constitute a violation of securities laws. Such actions could lead to accusations of market manipulation or fraud, resulting in severe penalties for both the company and individuals involved. Furthermore, it erodes investor confidence and damages the company's reputation in the long run. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively disclosing information only to certain favored stakeholders, would violate the principle of equal access to material information, which is a cornerstone of fair markets. This selective disclosure can lead to insider trading allegations and regulatory scrutiny. Professionals facing such situations should utilize a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves first identifying the material facts, assessing their potential impact on stakeholders, and then consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. If there is any ambiguity or concern about the appropriate course of action, seeking guidance from legal counsel or the company's compliance department is crucial. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all communications are truthful, accurate, and in full compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards, thereby protecting the interests of all stakeholders and the integrity of the capital markets. Question 12. Assessment of potential product safety risks for Colgate-Palmolive's new toothpaste line requires a robust approach. Which of the following best describes the most effective risk assessment strategy for Colgate-Palmolive to adopt, considering evolving consumer safety standards and potential regulatory shifts? Option A. A proactive risk assessment that continuously monitors emerging scientific research, global regulatory trends, and consumer feedback to anticipate potential safety concerns and integrate preventative measures into product development and manufacturing processes. Option B. A risk assessment focused solely on the immediate cost-effectiveness of raw materials and manufacturing processes, assuming current regulations will remain static. Option C. A risk assessment conducted exclusively by the legal department, focusing only on documented legal precedents and existing compliance requirements. Option D. A reactive risk assessment that primarily relies on historical incident data and current regulatory compliance checks to address identified safety issues after they have occurred. The correct answer is A. A proactive risk assessment that continuously monitors emerging scientific research, global regulatory trends, and consumer feedback to anticipate potential safety concerns and integrate preventative measures into product development and manufacturing processes. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Colgate-Palmolive, as a global consumer goods company, operates under diverse and evolving regulatory landscapes. Navigating these complexities requires a proactive and integrated approach to risk assessment, particularly concerning product safety and compliance. The challenge lies in identifying potential risks that could impact consumer trust, brand reputation, and financial stability, while also ensuring adherence to all applicable laws and ethical standards. A superficial or reactive risk assessment can lead to significant legal penalties, product recalls, and damage to Colgate-Palmolive's standing. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and forward-looking risk assessment that integrates potential regulatory changes and emerging consumer safety concerns into the evaluation process. This means not only identifying current risks, but also anticipating future ones by monitoring legislative trends, scientific advancements, and shifts in consumer expectation. This proactive stance allows Colgate-Palmolive to develop mitigation strategies before issues escalate, thereby safeguarding its operations and reputation. This aligns with the ethical imperative to prioritize consumer well-being and the legal requirement to comply with all relevant regulations, which often anticipate future risks. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on historical data and current known risks. This reactive stance fails to account for the dynamic nature of regulations and consumer safety standards. It could lead to Colgate-Palmolive being caught off guard by new legislation or unforeseen product-related incidents, resulting in noncompliance, potential fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to delegate risk assessment solely to legal departments without input from R&D, marketing, and operations. This siloed approach can miss critical operational or technical risks that legal counsel may not be equipped to identify, leading to an incomplete and ineffective risk profile for Colgate-Palmolive. Finally, an approach that prioritizes cost-cutting over thorough risk assessment, even if it appears financially prudent in the short term, is fundamentally flawed. It ignores the potential for much larger financial and reputational costs associated with non-compliance or product failures, violating both ethical responsibilities to consumers and the long-term business interests of Colgate-Palmolive. Professionals at Colgate-Palmolive should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes continuous monitoring, cross-functional collaboration, and a commitment to ethical conduct. This involves establishing clear protocols for identifying, evaluating, and mitigating risks, with regular reviews and updates. The framework should encourage open communication across departments to ensure all potential risks are surfaced and addressed comprehensively. Prioritizing consumer safety and regulatory compliance, even when it incurs short-term costs, should be a guiding principle. Question 13. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Colgate-Palmolive sales representative when discussing a new oral hygiene product with a potential customer who has expressed concerns about gum sensitivity? Option A. Clearly explain how the product's specific formulation is designed to be gentle on sensitive gums and detail any clinical studies supporting its efficacy for such concerns, while also noting any specific usage instructions or potential mild sensations. Option B. Emphasize the product's advanced cleaning technology and potential for whitening, while briefly mentioning it is generally suitable for most users. Option C. Focus on the product's competitive pricing and promotional offers, suggesting it is a good value regardless of specific individual needs. Option D. Advise the customer to consult a dentist before making a decision, without providing any specific information about the product's suitability for sensitive gums. The correct answer is B. Emphasize the product's advanced cleaning technology and potential for whitening, while briefly mentioning it is generally suitable for most users. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Colgate-Palmolive employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving sales targets and adhering to ethical marketing practices, particularly when dealing with potentially vulnerable consumer segments. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for misrepresentation and the impact on consumer trust and brand reputation. The correct approach involves prioritizing truthful and transparent communication about product benefits and limitations, even if it means not securing an immediate sale. This aligns with general principles of ethical business conduct and consumer protection laws that prohibit deceptive advertising. Specifically, it upholds the expectation that companies like Colgate-Palmolive will act with integrity and avoid misleading consumers, thereby fostering long-term customer loyalty and brand equity. This approach respects the consumer's right to make informed purchasing decisions based on accurate information. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on meeting sales quotas by exaggerating product efficacy or downplaying potential side effects would constitute deceptive advertising. This violates ethical standards and potentially legal requirements that mandate truthfulness in marketing. Such an approach erodes consumer trust, can lead to regulatory scrutiny and penalties, and ultimately harms the brand's reputation. Another incorrect approach that involves withholding crucial information about product usage or contraindications, even if not explicitly asked by the consumer, is also professionally unacceptable. This failure to provide complete and accurate information can lead to consumer harm and is a breach of the duty of care that a company owes to its customers. It also bypasses the spirit of consumer protection laws that aim to ensure consumers are fully informed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance above short-term sales gains. This includes 1. Understanding the relevant ethical codes and legal requirements governing marketing and sales. 2. Assessing the potential impact of communication on consumers, particularly vulnerable groups. 3. Seeking clarification or guidance from supervisors or legal/compliance departments when in doubt. And 4. Choosing communication strategies that are truthful, transparent, and respectful of consumer autonomy. Question 14. Implementation of a new inventory valuation method at Colgate Palmolive has resulted in a significant adjustment to the reported cost of goods sold. To expedite the year-end closing process, the finance team is considering bypassing the standard internal audit review for this specific adjustment, relying solely on the preparer's justification. Which approach best ensures regulatory compliance and ethical conduct for Colgate Palmolive? Option A. Apply the adjustment based on management's verbal approval, assuming their oversight is sufficient to ensure accuracy. Option B. Proceed with the adjustment without internal audit review, trusting the preparer's expertise and the urgency of the closing deadline. Option C. Make a conservative estimate for the adjustment to avoid potential scrutiny, even if it deviates from the precise calculation. Option D. Document the adjustment thoroughly, including the rationale for the new valuation method, and seek independent verification from the internal audit department before finalizing the financial statements. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the adjustment without internal audit review, trusting the preparer's expertise and the urgency of the closing deadline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Colgate Palmolive employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and the imperative to adhere to stringent regulatory frameworks governing financial reporting and corporate conduct. The need to balance timely and accurate financial disclosures with the potential for internal pressures to present a favorable, albeit potentially misleading, financial picture requires careful judgment and a robust ethical compass. The correct approach, which involves meticulously documenting all adjustments and seeking independent verification of significant accounting treatments, is paramount for maintaining regulatory compliance and upholding ethical standards. This method ensures that Colgate Palmolive's financial statements are not only accurate, but also transparent and defensible under regulatory scrutiny. Specifically, adherence to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, or International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, depending on the relevant jurisdiction for Colgate Palmolive's reporting, is non-negotiable. The requirement for independent verification, often involving internal audit or external auditors, provides an essential safeguard against bias and error, reinforcing the integrity of the financial reporting process. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and professional skepticism expected of all personnel involved in financial reporting. An incorrect approach that prioritizes expediency over accuracy by making subjective adjustments without proper documentation or independent review exposes Colgate Palmolive to significant regulatory risks. This could include violations of securities laws, such as the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 in the U.S., or equivalent legislation in other jurisdictions, which mandate fair and accurate disclosure. Such actions can lead to severe penalties, including fines, sanctions, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves overlooking or downplaying potential accounting irregularities due to pressure from senior management or a desire to meet performance targets, constitutes a failure of professional responsibility and ethical conduct. This can be seen as a violation of the duty of loyalty and care owed to the company and its stakeholders, and may also contravene specific provisions within corporate governance codes or internal company policies designed to prevent fraud and ensure compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established accounting standards and regulatory requirements. This involves a proactive approach to identifying potential issues, a commitment to thorough documentation, and a willingness to escalate concerns through appropriate channels, such as the company's compliance department or legal counsel, when faced with ambiguity or pressure to deviate from best practices. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all financial reporting is conducted with the highest degree of integrity and in full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that a specific marketing team at Colgate Palmolive has been inadvertently sharing customer contact lists with an external agency without proper contractual safeguards or data processing agreements in place for over 6 months. The data shared includes names, email addresses, and purchase history. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Colgate Palmolive compliance officer? Option A. Instruct the marketing team to verbally remind the external agency about data confidentiality and continue sharing the lists while a new agreement is being negotiated. Option B. Inform the marketing team to continue sharing the data as usual until a formal policy update can be communicated. Option C. Advise the marketing team to delete all previously shared customer contact lists from the external agency's systems to mitigate risk. Option D. Immediately cease all data sharing with the external agency, initiate a comprehensive audit of all data shared, and begin drafting a robust data processing agreement for future engagements. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease all data sharing with the external agency, initiate a comprehensive audit of all data shared, and begin drafting a robust data processing agreement for future engagements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's need for efficient operations with its ethical and regulatory obligations regarding data privacy and integrity. Colgate Palmolive, as a global entity, must adhere to various data protection laws and internal policies. The challenge lies in identifying and rectifying potential breaches without causing undue disruption or compromising sensitive information. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any corrective actions are proportionate, effective, and compliant with all applicable regulations. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation that prioritizes data security and regulatory compliance. This means identifying the root cause of the data access issue, assessing the extent of any potential breach, and implementing immediate corrective actions to prevent recurrence. This approach is professionally sound because it demonstrates a commitment to data protection principles, such as accountability and integrity, which are often enshrined in regulations like GDPR or CCPA, depending on the jurisdiction relevant to the Colgate-Palmolive hiring assessment test. It also aligns with ethical business practices that build trust with stakeholders. An incorrect approach of immediately deleting all potentially affected data without proper analysis is professionally unacceptable. This action could lead to the loss of critical business information, hinder the investigation, and potentially violate data retention policies or legal discovery obligations. Furthermore, it bypasses the necessary steps to understand the scope of the problem and implement targeted solutions. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the issue due to the perceived low risk is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for potential data privacy violations and a failure to uphold the company's duty of care. Even a seemingly minor data access anomaly can escalate into a significant compliance issue or a breach of trust if not addressed proactively. Finally, an incorrect approach of only informing the IT department without a broader, documented plan for investigation and remediation fails to establish clear accountability and a structured response. While IT involvement is crucial, a comprehensive governance review requires a multifaceted approach involving legal, compliance, and relevant business units to ensure all aspects of the issue are addressed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the issue, assessing its potential impact, regulatory, financial, reputational, consulting relevant policies and regulations, developing a plan of action with clear roles and responsibilities, executing the plan, and documenting all steps taken. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with best practices in corporate governance and compliance. Question 16. During the evaluation of a new marketing campaign for Colgate Palmolive's latest toothpaste, a marketing manager proposes using a testimonial from a prominent social media influencer who claims the product whitens teeth significantly more than any competitor. The manager believes this will drive strong sales due to the influencer's large following. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with advertising regulations? Option A. Halt the campaign and request detailed, independently verifiable scientific evidence from the influencer and the marketing team to substantiate the whitening claims before proceeding. Option B. Consult with Colgate-Palmolive's legal department to confirm if influencer marketing regulations have changed recently, and if so, adjust the campaign accordingly. Option C. Proceed with the campaign as proposed, assuming the influencer's statement is a protected personal opinion and that the large following will ensure market success. Option D. Modify the campaign to remove the influencer's specific whitening claim, replacing it with a more general statement about the product's benefits, and proceed with the campaign. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the campaign as proposed, assuming the influencer's statement is a protected personal opinion and that the large following will ensure market success. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Colgate-Palmolive employee tasked with evaluating a new marketing campaign. The challenge lies in balancing the company's desire for impactful advertising with the imperative to adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing advertising practices within the specified jurisdiction. Misinterpreting or overlooking these regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and financial penalties for Colgate-Palmolive. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all campaign elements are not only persuasive, but also compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed marketing materials against the specific advertising standards and consumer protection laws of the relevant jurisdiction. This includes verifying that claims made are substantiated, that the campaign does not mislead or deceive consumers, and that it adheres to any specific rules regarding product endorsements or comparative advertising. This approach is best professional practice because it prioritizes legal and ethical compliance, safeguarding Colgate-Palmolive from regulatory action and maintaining consumer trust. Adherence to these regulations is a fundamental ethical obligation and a legal requirement to operate responsibly. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the perceived effectiveness or creativity of the campaign without regulatory scrutiny fails to acknowledge the legal boundaries of marketing. This approach risks violating consumer protection laws by making unsubstantiated claims or employing deceptive tactics, leading to potential fines and mandatory corrective advertising. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over thorough compliance overlooks the critical due diligence required. This can result in the launch of a non-compliant campaign, necessitating costly and disruptive recalls or amendments after the fact, and damaging Colgate-Palmolive's reputation for integrity. A third incorrect approach that assumes existing marketing practices are automatically compliant without reevaluation ignores the dynamic nature of regulations and the need for ongoing vigilance. This can lead to outdated practices being continued, potentially falling afoul of new or amended rules. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulatory requirements. This should be followed by a systematic review of the proposed campaign against these requirements, seeking expert legal or compliance advice when necessary. The process should include a risk assessment to identify potential areas of noncompliance and the development of mitigation strategies. Finally, a clear sign-off process involving relevant stakeholders should confirm compliance before campaign launch. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that Colgate-Palmolive is considering leveraging aggregated consumer purchase data from loyalty programs to personalize marketing campaigns for new product launches. However, the data collected does not explicitly include consent for this specific type of marketing use. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical stakeholder considerations for Colgate-Palmolive in the United States? Option A. Anonymize the purchase data to a degree that prevents individual identification, and then use it for personalized marketing campaigns. Option B. Obtain explicit opt-in consent from consumers for the use of their purchase data in personalized marketing campaigns for new product launches. Option C. Rely on the existing general terms and conditions of the loyalty program, which broadly state that data may be used for marketing, to justify the use of purchase data for personalized campaigns. Option D. Proceed with using the aggregated purchase data for personalized marketing, assuming that participation in the loyalty program implies consent for all marketing activities. Correct answer is B. Obtain explicit opt-in consent from consumers for the use of their purchase data in personalized marketing campaigns for new product launches. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Colgate-Palmolive employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and ethical considerations, particularly concerning data privacy and consumer trust. Navigating these competing interests requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with relevant regulations and maintain the company's reputation. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and obtaining explicit consent from consumers before utilizing their data for targeted marketing. This aligns with the principles of data protection and consumer rights, which are fundamental to maintaining trust. Specifically, under U.S. regulations such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and the Federal Trade Commission, FTC Act, companies have a responsibility to be transparent about data collection and usage, and to provide consumers with control over their personal information. Obtaining explicit consent for marketing purposes is a best practice that directly addresses these requirements, ensuring that Colgate-Palmolive acts ethically and legally. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing marketing reach without explicit consent fails to acknowledge the legal and ethical obligations. This could lead to violations of privacy laws, resulting in significant fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves anonymizing data but still using it for targeted marketing without consent is problematic because the definition of anonymization can be complex, and re-identification risks may still exist. Furthermore, even anonymized data usage for marketing might be perceived as intrusive by consumers if they have not agreed to such practices, eroding trust. A third incorrect approach that relies on broad, vague privacy policies to justify data usage without specific consent is also ethically and legally insufficient. Regulations often require clear and conspicuous notice and choice, which vague policies do not provide. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders, including consumers, regulators, and the company itself. Next, they must thoroughly understand the applicable legal and ethical frameworks, such as U.S. privacy laws and consumer protection guidelines. The process should then involve evaluating potential actions against these frameworks, prioritizing approaches that uphold consumer rights and transparency. Finally, seeking legal counsel and ethical review for complex situations is crucial to ensure compliance and responsible business practices. Question 18. Performance analysis shows that while Colgate-Palmolive has experienced strong sales growth in certain emerging markets, its performance in established Western markets has stagnated, impacting overall profitability projections for the upcoming fiscal year. Considering this mixed performance, which of the following approaches best reflects responsible and compliant communication to stakeholders regarding the company's financial outlook? Option A. Present a balanced overview of performance, detailing the successes in emerging markets and candidly addressing the challenges and strategic initiatives planned for the stagnant Western markets, alongside revised, realistic profitability projections. Option B. Focus exclusively on the revenue generated from emerging markets, suggesting that this growth is sufficient to offset any underperformance elsewhere and will lead to record profits. Option C. Emphasize the significant growth achieved in emerging markets to project a positive overall financial trajectory, while downplaying the stagnation in Western markets as a temporary challenge. Option D. Highlight the company's historical success and brand strength as indicators that the stagnation in Western markets is insignificant and will resolve itself without specific strategic intervention. The correct answer is C. Emphasize the significant growth achieved in emerging markets to project a positive overall financial trajectory, while downplaying the stagnation in Western markets as a temporary challenge. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Colgate-Palmolive, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight regarding its financial reporting and disclosures. The pressure to meet or exceed performance expectations, especially in a competitive market, can create an environment where ethical boundaries might be tested. The core of the challenge lies in balancing business objectives with the imperative of accurate and transparent financial communication, adhering strictly to the principles of financial integrity and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any performance analysis is grounded in factual data, and that any subsequent actions are ethically sound and legally permissible. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of performance, identifying both successes and areas for improvement, and then communicating these findings transparently and factually. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory framework governing public companies, which mandates accurate financial reporting and prohibits misleading statements. Specifically, this approach upholds the spirit and letter of regulations that require companies to provide a fair and balanced view of their financial health and operational performance to investors and stakeholders. Ethical considerations also demand honesty and integrity in all business dealings, including financial disclosures. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on highlighting positive performance metrics without acknowledging or addressing underperforming areas would be ethically and regulatorily flawed. This would constitute a form of selective disclosure, potentially misleading stakeholders about the true state of the company's operations and financial health. Such an approach could violate regulations requiring full and fair disclosure, leading to potential legal repercussions and damage to Colgate Palmolive's reputation. Another incorrect approach that involves manipulating data or presenting projections as certainties to create an overly optimistic picture is a direct violation of financial reporting standards and securities laws. This is not only unethical but also illegal, as it constitutes misrepresentation and can lead to severe penalties for the company and its management. It erodes investor confidence and undermines the integrity of the financial markets. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term gains over long-term sustainable performance by making decisions that might artificially inflate current results but compromise future growth or ethical standing is also professionally unsound. While not always a direct regulatory breach in itself, it can lead to practices that eventually necessitate misleading disclosures or create an unsustainable business model, ultimately leading to regulatory scrutiny or ethical compromise. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to ethical conduct and a deep understanding of the relevant regulatory framework. Professionals at Colgate Palmolive should always prioritize accuracy, transparency, and fairness in their analysis and reporting. This involves critically evaluating all available data, seeking to understand the underlying causes of performance trends, and communicating findings in a manner that is both informative and truthful. When faced with pressure to present a certain narrative, professionals should rely on established ethical guidelines and regulatory requirements to guide their actions, and if necessary, seek counsel from legal or compliance departments. The ultimate goal is to foster trust and maintain the long-term integrity of the company. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates that certain Colgate-Palmolive manufacturing facilities may be contributing to localized environmental degradation and impacting community well-being, despite the company's public commitment to sustainability. Which of the following approaches best addresses this feedback in a manner consistent with responsible corporate practice and regulatory expectations for a company like Colgate-Palmolive? Option A. Prioritize engagement with industry associations and government regulators to understand general best practices, deferring direct community engagement until specific regulatory mandates are issued. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive, multi-stakeholder impact assessment process to systematically identify, evaluate, and address the specific environmental and social concerns raised by affected communities and relevant regulatory bodies. Option C. Focus on addressing feedback from stakeholders who have the most direct economic ties to Colgate-Palmolive's operations, assuming their concerns are representative of broader community issues. Option D. Conduct an internal review of operational efficiency metrics to identify cost-saving opportunities that may indirectly reduce environmental impact, without direct engagement with external stakeholders. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive multi-stakeholder impact assessment process to systematically identify, evaluate, and address the specific environmental and social concerns raised by affected communities and relevant regulatory bodies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Colgate-Palmolive, as a global consumer goods company, operates under diverse regulatory landscapes and ethical expectations. The feedback highlights a potential disconnect between the company's stated sustainability goals and the perceived impact of its operations on local communities. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of stakeholder concerns, regulatory compliance, and ethical corporate responsibility, particularly concerning environmental and social governance factors. A robust impact assessment is crucial to identify, evaluate, and mitigate potential negative consequences of business activities, ensuring alignment with both legal requirements and stakeholder trust. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive and transparent stakeholder-driven impact assessment. This process should systematically identify all relevant stakeholders, understand their concerns regarding Colgate-Palmolive's environmental and social footprint, and then evaluate the actual and potential impacts of the company's operations on these stakeholders and their environments. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with best practices in corporate social responsibility and regulatory expectations for disclosure and accountability. It allows Colgate-Palmolive to proactively address issues, demonstrate commitment to sustainability, and build stronger relationships with communities and regulators. An approach that focuses solely on internal operational efficiency without considering external stakeholder feedback would be ethically flawed. It risks overlooking significant environmental or social harms, potentially leading to regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and erosion of public trust. Similarly, an approach that selectively addresses only the most vocal stakeholder groups or those with the most immediate economic leverage would be incomplete and potentially discriminatory, failing to capture the full spectrum of impacts and concerns. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated or generalized impact data without current, specific feedback from the affected communities would lack the necessary accuracy and relevance to inform effective mitigation strategies, potentially leading to continued or exacerbated negative impacts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes proactive engagement, thorough data collection, and a commitment to transparency. This involves actively seeking out diverse stakeholder perspectives, utilizing credible assessment methodologies, and integrating findings into strategic planning and operational adjustments. The framework should also include mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and evaluation to ensure that mitigation efforts are effective and that Colgate-Palmolive remains responsive to evolving stakeholder needs and regulatory landscapes. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates that a key supplier for Colgate-Palmolive's packaging materials has been flagged for potential violations of labor standards in their overseas manufacturing facilities. The supplier has provided assurances of compliance, but independent reports suggest otherwise. Colgate-Palmolive needs to determine the most appropriate course of action to uphold its commitment to ethical sourcing and supply chain integrity. Option A. Immediately terminate the contract with the supplier to avoid any association with potential labor violations, regardless of the impact on supply chain continuity. Option B. Rely solely on the supplier's assurances and internal documentation to confirm compliance, prioritizing uninterrupted product delivery. Option C. Impose financial penalties on the supplier as stipulated in the contract for potential violations, without further investigation into the nature of the alleged issues. Option D. Conduct a thorough, independent audit of the supplier's facilities and engage in a collaborative remediation plan if violations are confirmed, while ensuring continued supply chain stability. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough, independent audit of the supplier's facilities and engage in a collaborative remediation plan if violations are confirmed, while ensuring continued supply chain stability. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Colgate-Palmolive to balance its commitment to ethical sourcing and supply chain integrity with the practical realities of global operations. The pressure to maintain product availability and cost-effectiveness can create a conflict with the imperative to rigorously verify supplier compliance, especially when dealing with complex, multi-tiered supply chains. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the company's stated values are upheld without unduly disrupting essential business functions. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive impact assessment that goes beyond mere contractual obligations. This means actively investigating the potential consequences of a supplier's noncompliance on Colgate-Palmolive's brand reputation, regulatory standing, and consumer trust. It necessitates understanding the root causes of the noncompliance and developing a collaborative remediation plan that prioritizes ethical conduct and sustainability. This aligns with the principles of responsible corporate citizenship and the growing expectation for transparency and accountability in supply chains, often reinforced by industry best practices and evolving consumer awareness. Even if not explicitly codified in a single U.S. regulation for this specific scenario, an incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate financial penalties or contractual remedies fails to address the underlying ethical and reputational risks. This approach neglects the broader implications of associating with a non-compliant supplier, potentially exposing Colgate-Palmolive to significant damage to its brand image and consumer loyalty. Another incorrect approach, which involves immediate termination of the contract without any attempt at remediation, might seem decisive but could lead to supply chain disruptions, increased costs, and potentially alienate suppliers who might otherwise be willing to improve. This overlooks the possibility of constructive engagement and the potential for long-term supplier development, which can be more sustainable and ethically sound. A third incorrect approach, which involves overlooking minor infractions to maintain operational continuity, creates a slippery slope and undermines the company's commitment to ethical standards, potentially leading to more significant issues down the line and signaling a lack of genuine commitment to responsible practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the potential impacts of any supplier issue. This involves assessing reputational, operational, financial, and ethical risks. The next step is to engage with the supplier to understand the nature and cause of the noncompliance. Based on this understanding, a decision should be made regarding the most appropriate course of action, which could range from collaborative remediation and support to more stringent measures, always prioritizing the company's ethical commitments and long-term sustainability.